Welcome to the Daily Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings.com. I'm your host, Josh Hayes, joined as always by my co-host, Renee Miller. Renee, how's it going this week?
Great, Josh. How are you?
Okay, well, I got some good news and some bad news. All right, so I'm going to start you off with the bad news here. The bad news is after my projection of 475 yards for Adrian Peterson on Monday Night Football on last week's show, I still have not gotten a call from Mike Clay to help assist him with his projections. So I don't know what the deal is with that. It wasn't that far off. It was only 440 yards, I think, something like that. So, Mike, you have my number. Jeff has my number. Call me, okay? On the good side, yeah, absolutely. On the good side, I still have a job. Jeff hasn't fired me yet after that projection, so we're here. We're back for another week. I feel like I'm on borrowed time, so I guess we should probably get this going here. As always, if you want to find real analysis and great stuff to read, make sure you check out all Renee's work on ProFootballFocus.com all season long, along with ESPN. You might have heard of them, small little startup network. And along with rotoworld.com and all the many other fantasy outlets, you can definitely follow Renee Miller on Twitter at ReneeMiller01. And you can send all your comments, complaints, and questions to me at Josh Hayes FS on Twitter. All right, coming up in today's show, we're going to talk briefly about week one. We're not going to spend too much dwelling on it because we know you want to hear about what's happening here in week two. And there's some interesting stuff happening in the DFS space in terms of the Millie Maker and what people are doing in terms of prize pools. And then we'll talk about Monday night players. I think Renee and I both ran into the same situation in terms of exposure to Monday night. And then we'll talk about how much strategy is involved and how Renee likes to approach it. And then we'll all learn. So, because I don't know if I'm doing it exactly right, but I have my own personal take on it. And then we'll talk about, I'll ask Renee about her Sunday lineup lock checklist. I have my own personal checklist, but I doubt that it's definitely anything that compares to hers. So we'll get that ready for all of you to sort of run through the last minute things that you should check on before you enter your lineups for good heading into week two. And then we'll do the lineup breakdown as we will each and every week here. We'll have a lot more time to spend since we're shortening up the front end of the show, and we'll really dig into some pricing at each and every position and give you our top recommendations for cash games and GPPs. All right, so week one, Renee. Any surprises, any things that stood out to you that you'll carry on over into week two?
Well, I think the thing that everyone's talking about is how good the tight ends all were and how bad the wide receivers all were. And I do think that's a trend to continue. These are both volatile positions where you can expect some week-to-week variation in production. And yeah, there were some disappointing performances, some injuries for the wide receivers. And, after Thursday night, we thought, we know Gronk is the number one tight end for a reason. And then every other tight end went out and said, no, we're all just as good or close to it. So that's not something I think we should expect to see going forward. But certainly it was a surprise. Every tight end except for Greg Olsen and Owen Daniels, who I liked last week.
Yeah, Greg Olsen was like the number one guy on a milk carton right now, along with Odell Beckham Jr. in the first half of the Sunday night game. So a lot of people who thought, and I was actually just lucky I had limited exposure to Greg Olsen just because he was right in that top 5 tier there. So either you were, and for me, I was either going to go for much bigger value there down at the bottom with the Owen Daniels, and I had some exposure to Jordan Reed, so that was nice. I missed out on the Tyler Eifert and Austin Seferian-Jenkins, gravy train. So there's that, just mashed potatoes only for me. But overall, I think that we're going to see some adjustments being made, and I think that's a little bit. It's not too reflective in the pricing. That's the interesting thing about what I thought might happen from week to week, because FanDuel and DraftKings have to release the Millie Maker after lineup lock basically on Sunday to start, having a shot to not overlay the in a huge way. You don't get like a full price correction on everybody, particularly the Monday night guys. So Adrian Peterson is basically the same price. Carlos Hyde, we're going to get a definite discount on here, and we'll dig into that going further once we get into the positional breakdown. That's great that you mentioned that. Now, quick reaction topic for you in terms of these big tournaments. I was actually a little bit surprised that they said, let's just run it back. 1 week. We're fine with 1 week of recruiting to fill these tournaments there at all. And then Yahoo, especially, I was a little bit surprised, but maybe not so much, I guess, after talking a little bit more about it, that they didn't back down from their $1 million baller. They're still putting up $1 million. I think their overlay was something around 36K in terms of entrance that they missed on. And everybody says we're doing the exact same thing week 2. Do you expect there to be some significant overlay in any of these 3, or do you think they can fill it back here in again in week 2?
I mean, I think that DraftKings demonstrated last year that is the thing to do, that you push forward, offer it every week, and don't back down. And they ended up, some weeks they had overlay and some weeks they didn't. But I think on the whole, it was good for the industry that they did that. And I think Yahoo is probably seeing the same thing, that they want to have that $1 million prize associated with their name every week, and the people will come. So I think it's smart. I think they're likely to overlay again in the second week. But I do think it's a good strategy. It's certainly good for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing that I think the player to watch here is Yahoo, because if they overlay an even bigger number in week 2, now, I mean, not only are you not generating rake, but you're taking a pretty big loss on your featured tournament there. And we'll just see how much intestinal fortitude Yahoo has to keep that all season long, because we saw DraftKings sort of balk a little bit towards the end of that season when the overlay started to get a little bit big, and they decided to raise the price on everybody, and then everybody threw like one gigantic nationwide hissy fit, and it turned into them apologizing, making it right, changing the price back, throwing a free roll like DraftKings always does. So, I mean, it's an experiment of things that this year, I don't think that is going to happen for FanDuel and DraftKings. There's a point of no return. You put it up there and you roll with it, and you run every commercial possible during football season there in the morning. I don't think there is another time slot for anybody else but FanDuel and DraftKings in terms of commercials. If there is, I haven't seen it. But good for them and good for us. Somebody's going to win $1 million every single week. Somebody's going to win $2 million, and we're going to try to make it you if it's not going to be us. So we'll dig into that there. Let's talk about quickly the Monday night situation here. You and I both, we talked about this a little bit in the pre-show here about how we had a lineup that was in fairly good shape, but we had very minimal Monday night exposure. What's your take on that overall in terms of strategy? I know from a personal perspective, I always like having a Monday night sweat, but I want it to make sense. I don't want to have to go out and reach for the sweat and sort of sacrifice, I guess, overall optimal, lineup construction. What's your personal take on this?
That's it exactly. I like I've talked about on the show before, I like to decide the players that I'm going to target irrespective of price or game time. So it doesn't matter to me whether they play at 1 o'clock Sunday or Monday night or Sunday night or whatever. I try to be kind of agnostic to those kind of things. And sometimes it's hard. Like I went into Monday night winning a lot more money than I ended up winning at the end of Monday night. So when you go through that, it's hard to then not, immediately react the opposite and say, well, next week I'm having Monday night exposure for sure, because I don't want that to happen again. But you have to resist that a little bit. And maybe you want players in the Monday night game. Maybe it makes sense. The Jets at Indy in week 2 on Monday night. So I actually do. I like that game quite a bit. But forcing it, like you said, is a mistake.
Yeah, I agree with you there as well. And I've tried to remain balanced with it, but it's just very tough when you're sitting in a good position and then you watch the winning balance dwindle as Monday night goes, and you're like, oh, man, you know what? These guys are doing something that's working because they're passing me. And it's just sort of being results oriented. And we talked about how you want to put your players in the best position regardless of when their game start is. And, there's going to be people too that you don't necessarily realize this or see this too much, because not everybody's at the top every single week. It's almost impossible to do, but there's teams that just sit at the top and hold and sit up there. And, they have the top score and somebody on Monday night or Sunday night plays and they don't catch them. We just miss that part too, because I think the more likely situation in most cases is that you're going to have teams that are mostly done on Sunday with maybe 1 or 2 players on Sunday night or Monday night. And, at the very most, or somebody that's, maybe your kicker on FanDuel is going and that's all you got. So more nights than not, or more often than not, you're not going to have too much in the way of sweats for Monday night. And so you just have to respect that you're doing the right thing, and then just be happy when it works out and you have that Monday night sweat for, that potential home run play to bring you down the finish. So speaking of Sunday here, let's talk about lineup locks here and the checklist. I have a few things that I like to do for season-long stuff that I think translates well into DFS. But let's talk about your process overall and what people can do to make sure that they're ready and they have all the right things in place to set them up here week-to-week basis in their DFS lineups.
Well, I don't know if what I do is typical of what other people do, just because I spend, I start my research on Monday of the week prior because I write so many articles and, talk about DFS all week long. So I kind of have my core players in place very early on in the week. Sunday morning is not too much of a scramble for me. I'm paying attention to injury news and surprise inactives, of course. But a lot of what I do is try to sit on my hands and not tinker too much with all the work that I have spent the past 6 days doing just to switch it up, or because I feel like it's lineup lock, I need to be busy.
Right.
But a lot of people maybe don't start building lineups or setting lineups until Sunday morning. So I can't necessarily translate what I do, because my lineups have been made since Tuesday or Wednesday.
Okay. I have a little bit of a solution for that. For me personally, I'm definitely keeping tabs on RotoWire, RotoWorld, all the major outlets. I have the TV on for to hear what Schefter and Mort has to say, especially when something like Mike Evans pops up fairly late. And you know what? I'm also sort of mad at myself that I didn't think the way that we're thinking this week. For instance, like Jason Witten is going to probably be a focal point for a lot of fantasy teams with Des Bryant out of the lineup. I think and given the price adjustment, which was I think fairly minimal from week 1 to week 2, I think he'll be a fairly popular play, maybe even cash game chalk. But I didn't think about how that would potentially affect Austin Seferian-Jenkins when Mike Evans out of the lineup there in week 1. And that's maybe an adjustment that you should sort of think about, run through your head when you see an inactive that doesn't necessarily affect you. Because I was like, okay, I don't have any exposure to Austin Seferian-Jenkins. Mike Evans wasn't even a play for me this week. I'm good. And I left it at that, when I should have thought about how this could potentially impact lineups that I wouldn't want to change given the game script that's going to be adjusted. And we saw that adjustment with a big role for Austin Seferian-Jenkins. And that could happen again in week 2 if Mike Evans is out. So there's one piece of it. Now, as far as the tinkering goes, my personal solution to that is there's a bunch of various sites out there, including DraftKings, which, by the way, is rerunning their 100K free roll. So for anybody who missed out on week 1 or sat on the sidelines and is now joining the show or is interested in getting into the mix, 100K free roll. Again, it costs you $0 to jump in there, and that free roll is basically being published everywhere. I tweeted it out on Twitter, so you can find that in my my Twitter feed as well. But the way that I look at this is I save all my free roll lineups for the most part for Sunday morning, and then you can do all the tinkering you want with a contest that's free. You want to take chances. You want to play, Marcus Mariota for 4 touchdowns against Tampa Bay. You want Tyrod Taylor in there again. Whatever you want to do, it's a free roll. So you can sort of experiment, and then that part of the people who want to over adjust and take extra gambles and wait on that last minute news to make an extra lineup, there you go. At will, boom, have at it, and then you've sort of protected yourself from undoing the hard work and all the research you've done leading up to that point.
It's a good point.
That's my solution, and I'm going to try to stick to that so I keep my cash games intact. All right, we're going to move into the meat and potatoes portion of the show with a lineup breakdown here for week 2. We're going to go position by position like we did last week there as well. But before we do that, I want to let you know that 1 week fantasy means no season-long commitments here. It's fantasy football on demand. You want to play where you want with the players you want. Just pick your players, pile up the points, and pick up your cash here. Pick up your cash here. We're talking about DraftKings.com. That's it. All you have to do to get started playing right now, if you've already been scouting the players for your season-long fantasy teams, is put that knowledge to the test this football season at DraftKings.com. So hurry up to DraftKings.com right now and use the promo code PFF to play for free for a shot at $1 million in this week in the Millionaire Maker. Enter PFF for free entry right now at DraftKings.com. That is DraftKings.com. DFS.com. All right, quarterback position here. Who is going to be taking snaps behind center for you here in week 2?
It's going to be a lot of Carson Palmer again this week for me, and I think that's going to be a much more popular play this week. People are going to start remembering, how he was last year, and he was very low owned in the Millie Maker for week 1, but gets another good matchup, even though Arizona's on the road with Chicago. We just saw Aaron Rodgers, who is Aaron Rodgers, granted, have a great day. And I expect more of the same. I like Carson Palmer with John Brown. I also expect Michael Floyd to maybe be a little bit further along this week and maybe a little bit more involved in the game plan.
I like Carson Palmer as well. I think that a lot of people had a little bit of questions as to, how he would look coming into week 1 with no Michael Floyd. And, I thought it was a good spot overall against New Orleans Saints defense. I just didn't, I was too in love with like 3-4 other plays that I had, which was mainly Aaron Rodgers cash and, Matt Ryan, Eli to Odell Beckham, which didn't work out nearly as well. And then, trying to create some different combinations with Tyrod Taylor. So I will definitely take a look at him there as well. I think, speaking of Marcus Mariota, that's an interesting position here at Cleveland here in week 2. Cleveland got basically torched on both sides of the ball by Fitzmagic, and they had no answer for Brandon Marshall there as well. So this is a team in quite a bit of disarray. I just definitely expect them to play better here in week 2, but I think it's fine for them to target. The price adjustment was very minimal on our Mario on DraftKings. I believe it's just up to $6K. So, 1,000 over minimum there. And you can do the same sort of thing that you wanted that we talked about last week, where you take your minimum price quarterback and your GPPs, and then you can load up on the other positions. You don't necessarily have to link him up with like Kendall Wright, for example, like you mentioned. Julio Jones every week just sounds like it's going to be a pretty strong play. And that's something I'm going to take a look at there as well. I also, speaking of New Orleans, I think Drew Brees is going to be approaching chalk. Would you agree here against Tampa Bay after what Mariota did here in week 1?
Yep, absolutely. Back home in New Orleans, I think Brees is an easy play. His price is pretty affordable, and he's so much better at home than he is on the road. And Tampa Bay just had no answer.
Yeah. They sort of show the same things that they were last season, but like not an overwhelming pass rush, ability to get exposed in the secondary, quarterback play that gives the opposing team a short field, all the things that are like a perfect dream scenario for you on the other side of the ball as an opposing offense there. So Drew Brees, probably the chalk play. And here's the thing I want to say too, maybe you can speak to this really quickly, is my mantra for this season in terms of cash and 50-50 double ups is don't be afraid of the obvious play, because there's so much action and the fields are so large, especially if you're playing the bigger, the massive 50-50s and some of these different cash games. Is that I said, listen, Aaron Rodgers just seems like it's so obvious that people might not even want to play him, but he's in every cash game. I just 100% ownership in cash games for Aaron Rodgers for me. Same for Julio Jones. And if I have to break ties elsewhere, then so be it. But the ownership percentage was reasonable, and I cashed in every single one on DraftKings that way. Your thoughts on that approach?
Absolutely. I think people always overestimate ownership percentage for chalk plays. You see it on Twitter. This guy's going to be 90% owned, but it's never, ever the case. And especially this early in the football season, there's still so many possibilities. There's still so much that we don't know, and people are exploring a lot of different avenues with their lineups. And we're going to reach different conclusions more at this point in the season. And people that give DFS advice, are going to reach different conclusions about certain players more now than we will at week 12, say. So I think especially early on, but throughout the season, ownership percentages are always overestimated. And especially for cash games, play who you think is the best player.
Yeah, so you're not going to be able to talk me out of Drew Brees borrowing some sort of freak injury or something like that for cash games as well. You want to mix up your lineups and stuff. This is why we talk about what you can do from the GPP side. That's where you want to take your shots and go for low ownership and contrarian plays, but you don't necessarily need to mess around in the cash games there as well. So Breeze will be anchoring a lot of my cash games lineups here as well. What about Romo at Philly? Where does he fit in for you? Can he be a cash game option there as well? Will he be somebody you could split action with Breeze, or does he make more sense for GPPs? How do you feel about it?
I think he makes more sense for GPPs. I do like him. I still like the Dallas offense a lot. I like Terrence Williams a lot as a value play this week for obvious reasons. But I do think Romo's upside, or let's call it his safety, let's call it his floor, is capped a little bit by missing Dez. And I know that Dez missed a lot of the game and Romo still came out fine. But going forward, if teams know they don't have to worry about Dez, it changes maybe how they game plan a little bit. And maybe Dallas tries to rely more on this, multi-headed running monster that it has. So I do think that Romo's both his floor and his upside are a little bit reduced compared to what I thought last week when I absolutely loved him.
Yeah, I don't buy Jerry Jones's speech saying that we still just plan to run it about 25 to 30 times per game. Really? I mean, you got Jason Witten out there and Cole Beasley, who's 5'2". So they don't even need to double cover him. They can just, let the ref cover him. And that, I think that you're definitely in line. You saw how effective the run game was and how they did basically screen passing out of the run game, which is essentially a run anyhow. When you look at it from I guess a 3-yard pass perspective there as well. So I think we're going to see a ton of screens. You're going to see a lot of focus on the run game because that's their strength, and they don't want to have to push Tony Romo into forcing the ball to Terrence Williams or over to Jason Witten. Having said that, I'm still on Jason Witten there as probably one of my top tight end options. Just slipping back really quick to what we talked about cash games there. Are you by chance aware of Aaron Rodgers' ownership percentage here in week 1?
No.
Take a guess.
In like double ups?
Yeah.
I would guess somewhere around 22%.
Try 13.7.
Wow.
There you go. Case in point right there. Don't be afraid to play the chalk if you think it makes the most sense. I thought it was like a lock. I was like, okay, I expect like 30, maybe 25-ish, maybe some Matt Ryan in there. 13% to me, what was the best play on the board in my mind. So there you have it.
I started writing about week 1 for PFF in the beginning of August, and I said I'm building my lineups in week 1 around Aaron Rodgers. And
guess we're one of the only ones.
Yeah, see, no one reads what I write.
Okay. Any other quarterbacks that pique your interest? I have one more, but I'd like to hear a couple of your thoughts there.
I have 2 more, and I think they're probably both better suited for tournaments, but I expect both Joe Flacco and Andrew Luck to have bounce-back weeks. Flacco is going out to Oakland, which is not a good defense, not a defense in good shape, but an offense that at least wanted to play at a higher pace. I like a bounce-back week from Joe Flacco, and I also think that even though it's another difficult matchup, that Andrew Luck will be better at home on Monday Night Football. I like to see a bounce back from him too.
Yeah, I think he's just too good for him to keep completely down. And DraftKings isn't giving you too much help there with pricing him at 8,200. So they expect, I guess, a fair amount of production there as well. It does help that they are probably likely to miss Antonio Cromartie out of that lineup with various knee issues. I don't necessarily know if they've announced it as a torn ACL as of yet, but whatever it is, he went down in a heap, and I would be highly surprised if he plays there in week 2. So that should help out. Doesn't help out that he may be out with T.Y. Hilton, so maybe that evens out a bit. But regardless, I'm not playing Andrew Luck over Drew Brees for cash games, but I wouldn't fault anybody who wanted to get some exposure in one way or another. One quarterback I wanted to mention here is Nick Foles. Interesting for me against Washington. I had higher hopes for Tanland, for Jarvis Landry and Ryan Tannehill. It didn't exactly work. I didn't burn me, but it's not going to win a GPP obviously in that spot there. How much exposure should we consider having, at least for GPPs, for Nick Foles, given the price, which I believe is under $6K if I remember correctly here on DraftKings.
5,500 on DraftKings. I still don't know how Nick Foles scored fantasy points. I'm so confused on who caught all those passes. But yeah, Washington maybe improved a little bit on defense relative to where they were last year. It's probably too soon to say that for sure. And St. Louis is heading out on the road, but minimal exposure I'll have to him. He's not a guy that I go after. Even though the price is nice and the matchup is nice, I'm not a believer, frankly, in that receiving core, and that matters.
I don't blame you. Earmuffs, Nick, if you're listening. Okay, just earmuffs. We didn't, just so you don't hear any of that. We don't want to make Nick mad. You know that you just put the Jobu jinx on him, and he's going for 4 scores with 400 yards, right? So be wary of that. But I thought it's just interesting because it's Washington, and you know that it's, you know, to me it's going to be like a weekly target, at least from a defensive perspective. Like St. Louis, to me, I'm not crazy about a lot of defensive options there, because I just think there's 2 or 3 big options, and then there's a bunch of teams in the middle that you have to sort through, like San Francisco versus Pittsburgh, and, you know, weird matchups like that. But St. Louis against Washington is one of the defenses that I'm definitely going to try to get as much exposure to as possible. And I mean, it's 3,100, so you really aren't having to go too far out of, you know, your way to roster them on DraftKings, for an example. All right, let's move on to running backs here. The good news is if you like the value play overall, you didn't get gouged in terms of price from week to week. And the bad news is you're still having to pay up for some of these running backs that didn't necessarily perform at the level that you would have hoped overall. So let's talk about who's going to be some targets for you in the backfield for week 2.
Some of the, and I should say, I think that's kind of nice. I don't think prices should adjust on the basis of week 1 dramatically anyways. So I think it's fair that we're still paying up for Adrian Peterson and Lynch, Lacey, Murray, LaShawn McCoy. A couple of guys I like at the higher end. I like Marshawn Lynch this week. I like LaShawn McCoy again. We saw what D'Angelo Williams did to New England, and I do think McCoy is a better runner than that. I like that they're in Buffalo for this game. Let's see. I like some of the guys that are cheap. I like, again, Rashad Jennings against Atlanta is really high on my list. You only have to pay $5,000 for him.
Any interest in Justin Forsett, 6,200 at Oakland? A lot of people are sort of on him, given the situation that the Baltimore Ravens were in with their wide receivers and lack of experience there with Kamar Aiken and missing Brashad Perriman, obviously missing Torrey Smith, and with the I guess the advent of Mark Trestman now in that offense and how he loves to throw, 80% of the screen passes towards that running back's way. There obviously didn't pan out the way fantasy owners expected there in week 1, but at 6,200 on the road at Oakland, I think that's a pretty good spot given the price there. Justin Forsett for you here in week 1, or Lamar Miller for 5,500 at Jacksonville?
I prefer Forsett there. Forsett is on my list. He's on kind of my master list. I haven't fully made up my mind on him yet, but okay. He made the master list because I really do expect a nice bounce back week for all of Baltimore. And right, we saw Oakland not put up much resistance in week 1. So I do prefer Forsett even at 6,200 to somebody like Lamar Miller.
I agree with you there as well. I think I'm going to try to get a few more shares of Amir Abdullah there as well. I thought he flashed a lot of talent, and I do sort of like, for the time being, that they're going to leave him on kickoffs in case he happens to break one and get you those extra 6 points in the return game there as well. But I also think it's just a matter of time before he gets handed the keys to the car, and because he's clearly more explosive than Joique Bell, and he can be a 3-down back. He's obviously the guy that they want out there in the passing game. So for PPR purposes, you definitely like that aspect of it. And he is in the Carlos Hyde category for me to a lesser extent, where we're going to have a short window of where you can get these running backs at these prices, and then you're going to see top 10 pricing for Hyde for sure. But I think maybe Amir Abdullah, once Jim Caldwell realizes that he's the best back, in that offense, in that backfield. I know we're talking about running backs, but I want to quickly ask you, since we're talking about the Detroit Lions, about what you feel happened to Calvin Johnson. Because to me, he was sort of everybody forgot that this was maybe the best wide receiver in the game at a $600, $700, $800 discount, depending on what site you played him on, and it hit totally, toilet bowl flush on that play. Are you back in on Calvin for week 2?
No, I'm not actually, and it's a complete personal bias. I swapped a few shares of Julio for Calvin Johnson Sunday morning, with much regret. So, no, he's in the category of I need to see it again before I roster him.
Yeah, and he was basically like you said, you're still having to pay $8,200. You're paying top 5 pricing for Calvin Johnson there on DraftKings, for example. There, feel much more comfortable paying another $700 for Julio Jones. Now, here's an interesting question: Odell Beckham Jr. there after 1 week, is he a different situation? Are you willing to trust him for another week after a quiet performance in week 1 against Dallas?
Yes. I'll use some Odell Beckham Jr. in week 2. This is supposed to be a high scoring game. The Giants are at home. He had the targets. He's the focal point of their offense. They're not going to get away from that after 1 week, and in a weird week at that. That was a weird game for a lot of reasons. No, that's a situation that I trust. I'm not sure what's going on with Calvin Johnson in Detroit, whether it's, there's some whispers that it's mismanagement by the coaches.
I don't get it overall. I mean, no matter what play you call, if it's a pass, you can also sort of just, as the quarterback, Matt Stafford, find a way to throw the ball up to the guy who's the tallest receiver and the most talented player on the field. I don't get that piece. I also don't get how
weird is they're not letting him do that they're trying to. Yeah.
I don't understand that at all. So yeah, I have some level of concern, but I also don't want to. Maybe I should take your approach and just let the price come down, because we'll probably see a further adjustment after week 2. I'm hoping, if that happens back-to-back weeks. But it is Minnesota who did not look terribly good there in week 1 as well. So if there's a chance for them to bounce back, this could be the spot. My question to you is, if you're not going to feature Calvin Johnson in the passing game, and you're going to watch Amir Abdullah shake Eric Weddle out of his shoes on probably the best touchdown run I saw all weekend, but still give him 7 carries, what are you going to do on offense? Is it's the Eric Ebron show if you're Detroit? I don't get it. That's the concern that I have. I still think Amir Abdullah is too cheap and too talented to not make any of my rosters overall, but I think I'm just asking a rhetorical question. So I'll move on. And
you bring up a really good point. You bring up a point that and it's a mistake that we make a lot. And it's really hard to know which side to come down on this issue, which is that we think players should be used in a certain way and we roster them accordingly, but that what we think doesn't align with reality. And so everything you're saying about Amir Abdullah is true, but if Detroit doesn't heed that,
right,
you're screwed next week. Another player that fits that category maybe is Shane Vereen. Maybe the Giants could stand to, get Shane Vereen more involved in the passing game. But unless they watch the game tape and arrive at that conclusion, it doesn't matter how cheap he is or how good he's been in years past as a receiving running back, he's not worth rostering. We went through it with Travis Kelce last year. He caught every ball that was thrown to him. So instead of throwing him 4 balls, Andy Reid, throw him 12,
right.
But that's not their game plan. And it is hard to know where you are. If it's so plain to you that Amir Abdullah should be used in this way, how could he not be used in this way? It all clicks for you, but we're not in the coach's office. We're not drawing up the game plan. So that's something that I personally struggle with a lot.
So what we're saying is Renee and I are available for assistant GM and GM duties at various teams. If you guys want to start winning, contact us. Our Twitter handles are on the screen. Okay. And then we'll get your team on the right path. All right. In the meantime, we'll continue.
You want to be out in front of it too. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, we're
really
first come, first serve, by the way. We're not going to be nitpicky if Jacksonville calls or somebody like that. So, right. Exactly. Okay, back to some running back. We're moving down the list here to some value plays. We mentioned Carlos Hyde. I think he's going to be high ownership. And when I say high ownership, I guess I mean 14%.
right.
Like Aaron Rodgers. I have no idea. But he's in there for cash for sure for me in week 2. Definitely against Pittsburgh. So I love that matchup there. CJ 2K or no K or starter K, 3,800 level of interest for you.
The level of interest is pretty high. I think the risk is low enough that if he is, what do they call him, the lead dog for Arizona, it's a good spot for them. Chicago, not a great run defense, below average in fantasy points allowed to running backs, and or above average, I guess, in fantasy points allowed to running backs. So the risk is low enough that I'm comfortable with it in all formats, tournaments, cash games. Yeah. I think it'll be popular.
Too cheap not to roster for sure. Any sneaky or home run plays out there? Do you want to save them for your article? Do you want to tease one?
Oh, no, it's okay. I'll just say, because the more I say it, the more used to it I'll get, and I'll be able to write it, that I'm probably using Bishop Sankey quite a bit against Cleveland, your poor Browns. They're going to be a popular running target for me. Until they prove otherwise. Loved Chris Ivory last week. I think Bishop Sankey actually looked a lot better in week 1. And that happens sometimes. Not only is he second year now, but he's got a competent quarterback, and that can just open up so much for a running back. He averaged over 6 yards per carry in week 1, and it gets another easy matchup. So his price is $4,500 on DraftKings, and it's also, I think, reasonable on FanDuel. Yeah, 6,500 on FanDuel.
Yeah, both options as well. I'll be in on Sankey as well. No, if my Browns are going to lose, they're going to help me win on DraftKings. That's what they can they can do for me. So I think it makes a lot of sense there as well. On the other side of the ball too, I just want to sort of put this in your bank. I'm not saying you need to make this play, but keep your eye on this, because Duke Johnson is going to take over that job there in Cleveland. If you watch him, Isaiah Crowell run the ball versus what Duke Johnson does, and you could not tell from that game because the Jets have such a stout run defense, but you can see the level of ability, the explosiveness. He's better out of the backfield. He's basically better at everything. The only thing you could maybe give Isaiah Crowell credit for is being potentially better, between the tackles, maybe as a goal line vulture in this situation. But some point somewhere in the season, Duke Johnson's going to take over this job, and there's going to be a 2-3 week window. Right now, I think he's priced at 3,800, 3,700, maybe 3,800 on, or 3,700, one of the two on DraftKings. And there's going to be some breakout value there. So maybe in one of the cheaper GPPs, I'll just throw him in there and see if I hit a home run and not sweat it if it doesn't work out. I mean, you don't need him to do too much to pay off that price tag, but that's coming somewhere down the line. Same in a poor man's Amir Abdullah version. Duke Johnson, at least in the preseason, has sort of flashed that level of ability for everyone to know, at least in Cleveland, that he's the best back that they have.
Good point.
Last thing I want to say too is when coming with running backs here, we're coming up on a lot of cheap options, and we're coming up on a lot of cheap options at wide receiver as well. How do you balance that between all the value plays? Because I came up with a one lineup that had like 2,500 available, and I was like, whoa, I just went too far on the value plays,
I know. It just turns out that there are a lot of good value plays in week 2, and there aren't a lot of top wide receivers that are in good matchups besides Julio Jones, maybe Antonio Brown. So I've actually written about, you don't have to use all of your salary cap. And that's, I did it more for baseball, and I believe it in every game. If you have the roster that you feel like is the best that you can put together, and you have money left over, let it go. Let it be. 2,500 is kind of a lot to leave on the table. But some weeks I think that's going to happen in some lineups, and you're going to make more than one lineup. So if you have one, that you really like that has that much money left over, I wouldn't sweat it too much. It's the same thing as what time does the player play, or just if you've identified who the best plays are and they just happen to not cost as much as you're given, it doesn't mean they're suddenly not bad plays because they're not expensive enough.
We just want something for our money. So if we can exchange the $2,500 for a buffet voucher, DraftKings, or something, free soda at the gas station, well, we'll feel better about it. It's like we get something for our money. I think actually too, Fantasy Aces fantasy salary pro format rewards that sort of cost saving. So if you're a good coupon clipper during football season, maybe that's the format that you should potentially check out. I haven't spent enough time with it because I usually love to spend all the money or find a way or talk myself into, and maybe that's not the best thing. So I'm going to try to be more cognizant. Yeah. I'm going to try to balance my value plays with the best options and forget about the money afterwards. Take your advice. All right, wide receiver position. We touched on some of the guys there as well. How about some cheaper options for you as well? Are you priced off or scared off of Davante Adams at 4,900 in week 2?
No, he led the team in targets, and I think everybody's going to be off of Cobb and Davante Adams this week, and I love them both. Cobb caught everything thrown his way, and he's going to have another week of shoulder healing under his belt. And Adams, like I just said, had more targets than anyone else. So James Jones got the touchdowns, but touchdowns are the difficult thing to predict and can fluctuate from week to week. I don't chase touchdowns, but a lot of people do. So no, I'm not scared off of Davante Adams at all. Love him.
Yeah, I could definitely get behind that pick there as well. One quick note I want to mention about the lineup optimizer really quick as we're talking about it. I'm looking over at DraftKings, and you and I both know, everybody knows that DraftKings has a flex position. But if you take a look at their optimizer there, they actually list 3 running back positions when you're setting a lineup for DraftKings. As an example, on Pro Football Focus. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go to profootballfocus.com, click the Fantasy Hub. Under the daily tool, you need to be a gold subscriber. It's 1,000% worth it. So make sure you do that. Then once you get access to this badass lineup optimizer that will help you run through optimal plays for your lineups. And I use it, and it made me money in week 1. So far so good. I wouldn't recommend it if I didn't use it myself. But my question to Jonathan Bales was, hey, where's the flex spot? Just, paraphrasing here. And I was like, are you basically saying that on DraftKings you should try at all costs to roster a running back in your flex spot? And he's like, yes, exactly. That's exactly what it means. So there's a little strategy tip for you.
A receiver, not a running back.
Sorry?
A receiver, right?
No.
DraftKings is a PR site. Bales is always talking about putting a receiver in the flex spot.
He did, and we talked about that on the show. And he's like, it used to be based on the pricing that you almost always had to try to play a wide receiver in the flex spot. But I sent a specific DM to him minutes before the show started because I was like, well, maybe they just need to update their patch and show me the flex spot when I click on DraftKings. And he was like, no, based on the formula, you should try at all costs to play a third running back in the flex. So maybe you can take that up with him. Because you're exactly right. He did say that on air.
Yeah, we've talked about it before. Well, I'm talking to him later tonight, so.
Okay, all right, fair enough. So maybe you can clarify, then we'll readdress it on the next show. But basically, he's saying, and it makes sense to me, at least for week 2, the early onset, when you have this amount of great value plays at the running back position who are going to get a ton of touches, like the Carlos Hydes, and the Abdullahs, the Forsets, and the like. But there's also some wide receiver options there as well. So it makes it interesting, but I'm going to trust that information until you come back with the recon, and then we'll talk more about it next week there as well. All right. We talked about Davante Adams. Stevie Johnson paid off for me in my article. Thank you very much, Stevie, for making me look good. Cause he was the featured picture I originally chose Amir Abdullah. He was fine, but he just didn't have as good of a looking picture. So they decided to swap it. And he looked very nice. 4,200. I'll have plenty of shares of him as well. Dante Moncrief. Cash game, GPP, everywhere. Buying a jersey.
If T.Y. Hilton is out, then everywhere. Otherwise, I like him in GPPs. He's a big play guy. He's another year advanced. Like I said, at home, I think that especially with the Jets having a good run defense, that the passing game is going to be back on Monday night. So, yep, give me some Moncrief.
Okay. Home run options.
Receivers. Give me some Saints receivers. Brandon Cooks and Brandon Coleman.
Coleman had a nice quiet game there, and looks like he's officially become the new Marcus Colton that we talked about. So Marcus Colson's probably putting his name change paperwork in as we speak. Sneaky options for you besides Coleman, Saints receivers. Any other guys that we need to think about?
Who's sneaky? Pierre Garçon. People might not be thinking about, but Deshaun Jackson's going to be out for a while, and Garçon had also quietly a nice game. 7 catches. I'll remember it wrong, but not bad for PPR. Pierre Garçon is okay, and sorry, I lost my train of thought. They're at home. I know you're liking the Rams defense,
right? But
Garçon's only 5,400 and is clearly the lead receiving option there.
Yeah, 6 for 74. By the way, nice handy little game log tab on the Fantasy Lab page there as well, so you can flip through and actually look. This is nice too. Look exactly what happened throughout last season, along with what's happening here the first couple weeks of the season too. So point of reference for last season. That's awesome. Something you never see on all-in-one pages on a game log. It's 2014 and 15. So I like that for 5K. I think it's a strong play. Related to that, moving on into tight ends, Jordan Reed, an interesting option. He was the guy that I was trying to think of when we were talking about tight ends earlier, or in a little bit in the pre-show, where that's where my exposure lied instead of, which was good. It was fine. You'll definitely take it. I would have obviously rather had Eifert or Austin Seferian-Jenkins, but super solid and probably ticketed for a more increased role here in week 2. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. As long as he's healthy, he's been a great play. Every time he's been on the field, I feel like he just doesn't stay. So we haven't seen it for a long period of time, but
right. He has commitment issues is what he is. He's
poor guy.
Right. He's in there and he's like, I'm leaving. I can only take so much of this DFS. And but in the meantime, as long as he's around before he packs his bags, 3,700 on DraftKings there as well. Cheaper than Tyler Eifert, which is priced at 4,200. I'll be having some shares of him as well. Any other players? We mentioned Witten. We mentioned Austin Seferian-Jenkins there. Off the radar guys. You feel like Owen Daniels needs to bounce back a little bit here before we touch him again?
Yes.
One word answer. It's like
one word answer. Moving on.
Yeah, moving on. You can tell how she feels about that in one word. Okay, let's move on to defense.
Consider if he's good to go, maybe Charles Clay.
Yes. Okay.
I like as a piece of the Buffalo offense against New England this week.
I think Tyrod Taylor has shown a propensity to not take a ton of shots downfield, and for them to play sort of conservative ball with behind that defense and the run game, and that sets up perfect for tight ends. You know, the way that any young quarterback getting their first few starts in the season does. So I definitely like some shares of him as well. So on the defensive side, we mentioned St. Louis at 3,100 on DraftKings. We mentioned Miami. Sneaky defenses here. Other defenses because there's a lot of tough options. Overall, I mean, I think I'd probably need to mention Baltimore at Oakland as well. I think came in graded out number 2 overall on Pro Football Focus in terms of defense for 2014. Yeah. What do you like for week 2?
I love Baltimore. I like some of the, I always look for the good ratios, the turnover ratios. Dallas comes out looking good there. Cincinnati too, rated really high or scored really high in interceptions, and faces San Diego, which threw the 4th most interceptions last year. They're kind of, let's see what they are on DraftKings, 3,000. So not too bad. Yeah, 3,000. If you're not buying the Andrew Luck bounce back, I guess the Jets maybe are a good option. Luck turns the ball over as well.
Yep.
The Giants are a really cheap option. We saw Matt Ryan. They intercepted Romo a couple times Sunday night, and we just saw Matt Ryan throw a couple interceptions last night that could potentially convert into some nice fantasy points for the Giants at home.
I like those plays there as well. One I want to quickly mention there that's I think value priced overall is 2,800 for the Denver defense at Kansas City. It is on the road, and I understand and realize what KC did there in Week 1. I want to give more credit to Brian Hoyer to that for that necessarily than 100% KC defense. I mean, obviously it's a solid defense, and they've got playmakers and Justin Houston and the like there. However, graded out number 1, if I'm correct, the Denver defense last season in 2014 overall on ProFootballFocus.com, as I became aware as I did my research there, and sort of why I'm willing to give Peyton Manning a pass for some of the Week 1 debacle or action or lack of arm strength, all that hubbub. I'm not worried about it, and I'm actually going to not worry too much about Week 2 on the road at Kansas City, because that's, I think, a tougher matchup there as well. I'll take a look at matchups down the road with Peyton Manning, and if his price continues to slide, then I might jump in. But having said that, I think Denver is sort of under the radar a little bit, and I don't know why necessarily. When you look at the amount of talent they have some of the best cornerback tandems in the game there as well. They added Shane Ray, who they got at a deep discount, I believe. Am I right? Shane Ray, the guy who I think got busted for a failed marijuana test.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and fell down the draft boards. Was supposed to be a top 10, top 15 edge rusher. So now they got him for basically, a super deep discount because of the drug test. You pair him with Von Miller on the outside there. That's a great situation overall. So I think there's a ton of playmakers out there in Denver, and I think it's going to be a different game for Kansas City there in Week 2. You don't necessarily have to make that play, but it's 2,800 and the number 1 D ranked last season, so I think it warrants consideration. All right, that is going to do it for today's show. What's coming up for you this week? What can we look forward to before we catch up with you again next week?
For RotoWorld, I'll be writing contrarian plays and bargain plays for FanDuel. I'm going to write DraftKings plays for Pro Football Focus. And for ESPN, I'll be writing an article specifically about the flex, whether you want value, safety, or upside at your flex position, and looking at doing some kind of game analysis based on the Vegas lines.
All right, very interesting stuff, and I always like to kick off a lot of my research there with the Vegas line, so I'd love to pair that with the research you have. I just kind of feel like you're doing my homework for me for my own article here that will be appearing each Friday/Saturday on ProFootballFocus.com. I'll be taking a look at the running back and wide receiver punt plays / value plays all season long, so you guys can definitely look out for that. I'll be on the air for RotoWire.com today, tomorrow, and Thursday, covering baseball on Tuesdays and football plays, talking about FanDuel options for Wednesday and Thursday. You can check that over on rotowire.com/podcasts. So that's going to do it for today's show. Thanks for watching and listening today. Our show is brought to you, as always, by DraftKings.com, America's #1 one-week fantasy football site. Don't forget that you can subscribe to PFF Radio on iTunes. You can listen on Stitcher, Blog Talk Radio. Check us out here on YouTube. And you can watch the official Pro Football Focus YouTube channel on the Fantasy Sports Network as well. Thanks, as always, to my excellent co-host, the best in the business, Renee Miller, for joining me and her expert insight. And don't forget to follow her on Twitter at ReneeMiller01. And you can send all your comments, complaints, questions, and queries to me over on Twitter at JoshHayesFS. Thanks for watching and listening, everybody.